to you, John Agar. The Brain from Planet Arous. Is that not a most magnificent movie title? Tell me it's magnificent. 1957's The Brain from Planet Arous stars Joyce Meadows, Thomas Brown Henry, Robert Fuller, and John Agar. This is Dumpster Dive Film Review's third encounter with John Agar. I may need to start putting his name in the intro. The credits tell us that Nathan Hertz directed this movie, but it turns out the director's real name was Nathan Huron. He apparently had his name changed in the credits because he was embarrassed by this movie. Always a good sign.
I don't understand it. Hey, Dan, it doesn't make any sense.
Maybe he was listening to the audiobook of the script. What John Agar, aka Steve March, hears are spurts of major radioactivity on Mystery Mountain, because that's a real name.
Hasn't seen a human being since 1900 when the prospectors gave it up.
Steve and Dan are gonna go investigate after being fed lunch by Steve's girlfriend, Sally. And Sally's dad, seen here fresh from his fashion shoot with Vacationing Dad Weekly.
How long do you expect to be gone?
3 or 4 days, if the spooks don't get us.
Don't you think you ought to notify the AEC, Steve?
The Association of Egregious Clothing, I'm about to report you for that shirt.
I guess we can't make it any further in the Jeep.
That'll happen when you drive into a rock. You could always ask the boom op to dig you out. Because the desert is apparently not hot enough, Dan brought a hairdryer.
Pile of rocks.
Wasn't there last winter.
But it hasn't seen a human being since 1900. Steve must not be a human being. Steve and Dan find a cave that had just been recently blasted out of the rock, so they go inside and find the brains behind the entire operation. What the actual hell? Steve and Dan shoot at it, but it has no effect. The brain kills off Dan, oh sure, kill off the cute one, and takes over Steve's body. Now Steve is all creepy and incredibly horny.
Wow.
Steve tackles Sally and rips her blouse, so George the dog attacks Steve and Steve storms off. Later at Steve's house, the brain leaves Steve's body and tells Steve that his name is Gore.
Why me?
Because you are a recognized nuclear scientist. I chose your body very carefully, even before I knew about Sally, a very exciting female. There are some aspects of the life of an Earth savage that are exciting and rewarding. Things that are missed by the brains on my planet Arous.
I suppose there are only so many ways a brain can have sex. Sally tells Dad that she thinks something is wrong with Steve, but Dad doesn't seem at all concerned about it.
Did it ever occur to you that Steve might have something on his mind?
It certainly did, and that was part of the problem. Dad goes to visit Steve and asks what's wrong.
I know Sally pretty well by this time.
Well, I should hope so. Aren't you her father? Whatever. Steve keeps spasming, and it's probably because he keeps having to wear these very uncomfortable looking contact lenses.
But I'm in love with him. We're going to be married.
Only because you saw him first. Dad and Sally head out to Mystery Mountain the next day to investigate what could have happened.
I've been out here with Steve before, and I know that cave wasn't here.
Apparently, Sally is not a human being either. Eventually, they find the hairdryer and Dan's body, and another brain. This one is friendly, though. This brain's name is Vol, and he is looking for the criminal Gore who escaped their planet Arous. Vol tells Sally and Dad that he will meet them at 8 p.m. the next night at their house. Apparently, Vol just knows where they live, and they're surprisingly okay with that. Meanwhile, Steve arranges to come to Indian Springs to watch some atomic energy tests being run on Friday. Gore leaves Steve's body again and says he has something planned for those watching the tests.
Through me, you shall have powers such as no man has ever seen before in the history of your planet. The power of pure intellect.
That is sadly true. We humans clearly do not possess such a thing. The next night, Vol appears to Sally and Dad and asks them to help him stop Gore and save the Earth.
I will need a body that will be inconspicuous and constantly around Gore.
Well, that leaves you out, Dad. We've seen your wardrobe. They decide George the dog is the best candidate. Steve, while possessed by Gore, goes to pick up Sally for a date. On the way, he decides to blow up an airplane because he can. Steve apologizes to Dad for freaking out when he visited the lab previously.
I was mad at Dan. He ran out on me in the midst of a very important experiment. I don't know, things just piled up.
Forget it, Steve. Forget it. It never happened.
Because I found his body, you rat bastard. George tags along on the date as they park on some deserted road.
Goodness, you've turned into a regular caveman.
Tee, that's funny because I was in a cave when a disembodied brain possessed me. He tells her that he is going to the atomic energy testing on Friday with Professor Tate and the Colonel, and he will introduce his discovery.
You frighten me when you talk like that.
It's true. I've discovered a power that's gonna make me the most feared man on Earth.
Yeah, that's the way into a girl's pants. When they hear about the plane explosion on the news, Sally convinces Steve to stop by and see if he can help. Not sure how, but clearly Gore, aka Steve, isn't sure how either. Vol tells him that Gore can only be killed if he is outside of Steve's body and struck in the fissure of Rolando. Gore needs to come out of Steve's body every 24 hours to have enough oxygen to survive. So if you try to touch the brains from the front, they're not solid, but they are from the top? That's random. The sheriff shows up at Steve's place and tells him they found Dan's body in the cave. Steve, aka Gore, kills the sheriff with his painful-looking contact lenses. Shut up, Kim Carnes. He shoves the sheriff's body back there somewhere. Who let Dad dress himself again?
Gonna be a lot of brass there. That's good. I want to talk to him about some ideas I've developed. Got some surprises for him.
Brass polish! Finally, it's Friday, and Steve is at the atomic testing facility. He asks to speak to them before the meeting about the plane explosion.
I can explain those deaths.
You see, guys, they're dead because they're not alive anymore. Steve shows them how he blew up the plane and killed Dan by blowing up the test buildings on the facility site. When this guy tries to shoot Steve, Steve radiates him to death.
Now these are my orders to you. I want to meet with authorized representatives from the United States, England, France, Russia, China, and India. I will state my proposition at that time.
So he's propositioning a proposition.
And you can't tell me anything about it.
You'll read about it in the papers.
When I'm rich and famous?
Yeah, about that. Infamous might be a better word now. Sally talks Steve into taking a nap before his second meeting.
Gore is tired because he has had no opportunity to return to his true form for oxygen. He will be very vulnerable.
You mean that spot near the top of the brain known as the fissure of Orlando?
You have a good memory.
For a goldfish, it's the fissure of Rolando, not Orlando. Back in Indian Springs, Steve demonstrates his power again to the international delegates by blowing up a passing plane, and everyone seems strangely okay with this.
I will return to my planet Arous, and through its vast intellect, I will become master of the universe. After I'm gone, your Earth will be free to live out its miserable span of existence as one of my satellites. And that's how it's going to be.
Has he explained to them that he's not actually Steve, or do they think Steve is from another planet? Meanwhile, Sally rips a page out of a book with a diagram of the brain, pointing out the fissure of Rolando, and leaves it at Steve's house with a note that says the fissure is Gore's Achilles heel. The good news is the sheriff is still alive and clearly breathing. When Gore leaves Steve's body and begins taunting him, Steve spies the note while Sally finds the sheriff and accidentally makes him blink. Oops. An epic fight between Steve with his axe and the brain bouncing on his wires is over quickly, and the film ends with Steve owing a lot of people a lot of explanations. The question I have for a lot of these sci-fi films from the 1950s and 60s is this. Are you serious? I mean, sci-fi is going to be a little bit crazy, that just comes with the genre, but radioactive floating brains with eyeballs? Who came up with this and then thought that'd be a good movie? The thing is, depending on your taste in movies, it kind of is a fun little flick. I mean, no, it can't be taken at all seriously, especially by modern audiences, but a couple of things that are interesting to consider when watching films like this is 1, the outrageous plot lines from the sci-fi films in this era, and 2, the special effects as they were in this time period that led to what we have today. Of course, a lot of the effects in this film are comparably crap, but the lack of modern technology forced many of these filmmakers to get creative and work with what they had, which is quite possibly the mentality that leads someone to think, evil floating brain, let's go for it! That's the kind of ingenuity that deserves acknowledgement every once in a while, so give this film a try. You may want alcohol, but yeah.
No. Mind your own business, will you? Get out!